Cari colleghi, a nome dell'Accademia di Romania di Roma è un grande piacere e un privilegio porgervi, come al solito, un caloroso saluto di benvenuto nella nostra biblioteca, nella nostra Accademia, per un nuovo convegno della Romanità Orientale, arrivato alla sua 6ª edizione, evviva! Un incontro scientifico dedicato alle realtà delle civiltà delle due aree europee del nostro continente, la penisola italica e il sud-est Europa. Un convegno che riunisce una buona parte, e comunque la più attiva direi, della famiglia di ricercatori e di studiosi che da anni dedicano la loro attenzione a queste realtà, ai rapporti e alle molteplici forme di interazione e di interferenza che uniscono queste due aree del nostro continente, dell'Europa. È un incontro ideato, come ben sapete, dai nostri cari amici colleghi di Università Alexandru Ioan Cuza di Iași, Università di Bucarest, con la collaborazione e la partecipazione continua della Facoltà di Storia di Cluj. Perciò è un incontro accademico che riunisce le 3 maggiori facoltà di storia della Romania e anche un risultato della proficua, lunga e amichevole collaborazione che membri di questa comunità delle 3 facoltà di storia delle università romene hanno sviluppato con accademici, ricercatori italiani interessati da tanto tempo a studiare le realtà della Romanità orientale. Questa particolare iniziativa che noi ospitiamo nella nostra veste di piattaforma per il dialogo scientifico accademico, devo sottolineare questo aspetto anche se non è la prima volta che faccio questa cosa. Questa particolare iniziativa è nata non in maniera artificiosa come nostra iniziativa, ma è il risultato proprio dell'impegno di questa famiglia, di questo gruppo di ricercatori che si sono aggregati un po' in maniera sovraistituzionale e sono legati da lungi duraturi rapporti di amicizia e di collaborazione, anche da esperienze sviluppate nelle stesse aree di ricerca della biologia inferior e non solo. È un'iniziativa che appunto è arrivata a essere longeva, ad avere una sua piccola storia e tradizione, appunto perché frutto di questa collaborazione delle 3 facoltà nominate. È mio dovere ringraziare ancora una volta il professor Lucrezio Burliva, il preside della facoltà di storia dell'Università Alexandru Ioan Cuza di Iași, e il professor Ioan Opriș, che sono l'anima, la doppia anima di questa iniziativa, per aver dedicato tutta questa energia a sviluppare l'incontro accademico che ci riunisce e ad assicurare in maniera continuata, ogni anno con la stessa energia, con lo stesso interesse, la partecipazione di questi membri della famiglia accademica che appunto è interessata ai temi di particolare rilevanza anche per la nostra scuola, anche per la storiografia italiana. Non è facile sviluppare questo tipo di attività, di incontri nelle presenti circostanze, al di là del lavoro solitario che tanti di questi ricercatori svolgono in situazioni non sempre dal punto di vista istituzionale amichevole e non sempre sostenuti materialmente come meriterebbe il loro lavoro. Bisogna ricordare anche che nei presenti tempi svolgono la loro attività in presenza quasi surreale di una guerra nelle vicinanze di quell'area, di quella regione dove tanti di loro sono impegnati nel lavoro archeologico, nei scavi archeologici. Vi ringrazio di cuore, vi ringrazio vivamente per il vostro impegno. La nostra scuola è felice a cogliere questa collaborazione che, come dicevo, fa parte della serie di eventi scientifici, di eventi accademici che la nostra scuola ospita in maniera, diciamo, tradizionale, e sono felice di poter contare su questa collaborazione perché nata, come dicevo, in maniera spontanea e con un potenziale importante anche per il futuro. Sono convinto che non sarà l'ultima edizione, non sarà il nostro ultimo incontro. Ringrazio ovviamente i collaboratori, i distinti professori italiani delle università che ormai anche loro da anni sono impegnati in maniera costante nel progetto della Romanità Orientale, e vi auguro per oggi e per domani un buon dibattito, un buon scambio di idee. Non mi allungo, non rubo altro tempo, vorrei soltanto invitare i due cari colleghi dell'Università di Iași e di Bucarest a presentare il loro indirizzo di saluto brevemente, per poi lasciare spazio ai relatori, perché abbiamo una giornata lunga con tanti interventi interessanti. Vi ringrazio.
Bonjour à tutti, mesdames, messieurs, permettez-moi de m'adresser en français, d'abord parce que mon italien n'est pas du tout au plus haut niveau pour utiliser un euphémisme, et deuxièmement, puisque c'est la langue commune pour la majorité d'entre nous. Je pense que le professeur Dino a mis l'accent indirectement sur un point très important lorsqu'il parlait de la 6e édition du colloque. Donc cette mise au point, c'était que le colloque n'est pas une notion abstraite, qu'il est le résultat de l'activité et de l'engagement des gens, parce que ce sont les gens qui ont fait toute cette édition du colloque. Et dans ma parole de salut, je veux remercier à tous ceux qui ont rendu possible le déroulement au long de l'année de ce colloque. Tout d'abord, professeur Dino, car sans son engagement, sans son enthousiasme, sans les sacrifices qu'il les a fait, ce colloque n'aurait pas été possible ou aurait été de toute façon plus pauvre qu'aujourd'hui ou que les autres fois. Puis, je veux remercier à tous ceux qui ont participé au long de l'année, aux professeurs et chercheurs, des universités de Iași, de Cluj, de Bucarest, à nos amis italiens qui ont prouvé en fait que toutes ces choses scientifiques sont possibles si on met en compte aussi l'art. Le colloque, c'est un résultat de l'art que tous d'entre nous ont mis pour son déroulement. Et je vois maintenant que ce colloque a réussi de créer même un petit réseau scientifique entre les très grandes universités de Roumanie et qui rend possible qu'au-delà des rivalités, une collaboration et la formation d'un réseau scientifique est possible. Je suis aussi heureux de voir qu'il y a aussi de jeunes chercheurs, d'anciens doctorants qui ont participé dès les premières éditions et qui sont devenus une présence habituelle à ce colloque. Et c'est pour cela que je les remercie à tous et je transmets encore une fois le salut de la Romanità.
long. I'll speak in English. I'm also very glad to be here with you today and tomorrow, of course, for the 6th edition of our La Romanità Orientale Italia meetings. What I'd like very much to say is, besides thanking again to Professor Dino for his wonderful hospitality, it's a pleasure, as always, to be here. I'll just remark the constants of our meetings, and the fact that even during the pandemic times, we still kept being together, and I'm sure that we'll be, in a few years, we'll be celebrating the 10th edition. Isn't it so, Professor Bolino? As a matter of fact, it's also my duty to pass you the salute of our Faculty of History in Bucharest and of our Dean. We have a new Dean, Professor Matei Gebuelu, is Professor of Modern History, and also for all my colleagues, and will be surely present with you for the next editions. Thank you very much again.
Ringrazio i due colleghi per il loro saluto e per il loro contributo. Questo è l'aspetto più importante in fin dei conti, anche per il contributo finale di questi incontri che in parte si è tradotto nella pubblicazione degli atti. Quasi tutte le edizioni hanno fornito un importante numero di saggi per l'annuario della nostra scuola, per l'Ateneo Greco-Romana. Sono convinto anche che anche questa edizione produrrà almeno una parte dei contributi che saranno pubblicati nella nostra rivista. E adesso ho di nuovo il piacere di invitare il professor Ivano Priscia a condurre la prima sessione del nostro convegno. Prego.
Thank you very much, Professor Dino. Now it's my pleasure to invite Chiara Cenati to present us Soldiers in Incognito, ethnographic poems from the Danubian military. Please, Chiara.
Thank you, Leon. Grazie Rudy per l'invito, e come al solito io mi dimentico di essere in Italia e quindi ho preparato la mia presentazione in inglese. Parlerò in inglese, mi scuso, per l'anno prossimo preparerò qualcosa in italiano. Today I'm going to present, without presuming to give a complete overview of the whole documentation, I'm going to present verse inscriptions where soldiers are not mentioned, but nevertheless must be either the dedicators or the recipients of the dedications. I am focusing on the Danubian military milieu, so I'm not going to dive now into the definition of what a Danubian province and what is not. This is a topic of a debate that is still on right now. Anyway, what we can say is that the Danubian provinces are a broad area that shares common features from an historical, social, cultural, and economic point of view. If considering the production of poetry on stone, its appearance is deeply related to the presence of the army, even though in different ways. Its appearance seems also to follow the infrastructure, the military infrastructure, more than coinciding with administrative borders. This idea of studying the verse inscriptions from the Danubian provinces as a whole group and as a corpus itself has actually already been published by Matteo Massaro in 2023 in a long article, but at the same time I was developing the same idea. So I've been working in the last years on the same corpus of inscriptions, and I hope that in the next year my book will appear on the poetic productions of soldiers in the Danubian provinces. Matteo Massaro has focused more on the philological aspects of these inscriptions. I will focus on the historical ones, so it's not going to be the same work, of course. So if we look at these inscriptions, it becomes clear that there are many inscriptions that do not mention soldiers at all, but that must be connected to the military milieu very, very deeply. And a first preliminary study in this direction has been made by myself and Peter Kruszwitz in a paper that has appeared this year and was in a volume that was created by Adam on the representation of camp followers in verse inscriptions. And the idea is to analyze all these inscriptions that are not directly related to soldiers, but to all people and camp followers that were involved in the military milieu, like their families, merchants, artisans, artists, and so on, and slaves, of course. So what I am going to do today is to give you some examples of all the cases in which soldiers or their families seem to appear in verse inscriptions, even though not mentioned explicitly, and in order to try to provide a more precise and to enrich the picture and to enrich the picture of what was the poetic production in military environment along the Limes. So the first group of inscriptions is related to actually soldiers that do not, inscriptions where the information about the military service is not complete. So the soldiers' tendency not to give relevance to their rank in the army is clear in many verse inscriptions, where the information is lacking, where we lack a part of the information, starting from apparently simple soldiers. And this is an example of one inscription from Obilaver. It's a verse inscription, late antique 4th century, dedicated by a husband to his deceased wife. And the husband indicates himself as just Miles, without saying Miles of what unit. And this is something that is uncommon in military epigraphy, where we always have the indication of Miles and the unit in which the soldier was active. Another example comes from his inferior, and here as well we have a very, very simple poetic part tu viatul cu transis resta legititul mobiter, legea trepete sit dismanius tuista republicia. And in this case, we have a father and his two sons that make a dedication to the third son who died. The father is a veteran and identifies himself as a veteran, and the two other sons that make the dedication are just militants. We don't know on what unit. The same situation can be seen in this inscription from Tomis that I republished recently, and this is fragmentary dedication made by a father to his little son, died when he was 5 years old, and the father, in this case, is a centurion. We don't know what unit. From Romanità, so the military fortress of the Legio Septima Claudia and Mesa Superior, we have two verse inscriptions also dedicated by fathers. This one by a father to his young son, and the father, Rupius Valerianus, is a beneficiarius legati, clearly in this case of the Septima Claudia, but he omits the information. And the same case in this other verse inscription of a husband to a wife. Aurelius Marinus is in this case also just beneficiarius. We don't know, it doesn't say exactly if he's beneficiarius perfecti or what, but of course it's clear also of the Septima Claudia. Going upward in the rank, we find the same motive. This inscription comes from Razialia, and we have in this case a long poem for a young woman who dies, and the dedication is made by the father, who says to be a tribune. We don't know what unit. So, looking at all these inscriptions, we find we can see some common traits. Somebody could think that the omission of the military rank is connected to the prosody, is given by metrical reasons. But actually, this information is given in the verse part of the inscription only in the case of Razialia. In all other cases, the information about the rank, the military unit, the military information is given in the prose part. So we cannot say this is related to the prosody of the inscription. Going a step further, we see that all these inscriptions are dated to the late 3rd century, 4th century. So we should think that probably in this period there is a change in the self-representation of soldiers in this kind of inscriptions. We could think that the army becomes more stationary, so there is not a strong need to say what is the unit of service, because everybody should understand it. But at the same time, in some of these cases, it's not clear what might be the unit. For example, in Mesa Inferior, it can be any auxiliary unit in the territory. Another possibility is that probably in the mentality of the time, this information becomes somehow superfluous and is not this important compared in the case of verse inscriptions, because in prose inscriptions we find it more systematically. So probably in verse inscription this is not, it becomes less relevant in comparison to the grief that people wanted to express in the case of death of a relative. The next group of inscriptions I would like to present is a group of inscriptions where soldiers in this case are really not mentioned. I'm going to provide a few examples. Of course, there are many more, but I'm not presuming, as I said, to come to any conclusion, just to give you an overview of the existence of this kind of monuments. First of all, a connection to the army can be traced in those inscriptions that are set up in the second half of the 1st century, beginning of the 2nd century, when military settlements were mainly inhabited by soldiers that were transferred from Italy. And it is the case of Viminatium, for example. We have an inscription that is dated to the end of the 1st century, where a couple is mentioned, wife and husband, and they both say that they died far from their motherland. In this case, it's clear that in the 1st century, we are at the very beginning of the military presence here, and it's clear that this kind of inscription had to be set up by some soldier, or in this case also the wife, clearly coming from Italy. This same situation, however, can be seen also in other parts of the limes. In this other case, we are much later, in the 3rd century. We have a dedication of an inscription that reminds the construction of baths for the veterans of a legion. We are in Singidunum, so the legion is clearly the Quarta Flavia. The inscription is apparently dedicated to the wife of this person, whose name can be seen actually in the acrostic at the beginning. So it's made by the first letters on each line is Eius Tertius. So this person doesn't declare his status, doesn't declare if he's a soldier or not, but it seems to be clear that if he finances the construction of baths for the veterans of the legion, he was probably himself a veteran of this legion. If we move from big legionary fortresses where it's not easy to say if people are really related to the army or not, as there we have also, of course, civilian settlements that developed with the time. So going to small forts, this seems to be more evident. And this is a stele, a funerary stele found in the territory of Rhezia, with a scene of funerary banquet and typical formulas that can be seen in an inscription for soldiers. So it was probably this Titus Livius Lentinus, who was probably a soldier himself. Going further in Pannonia, we have in Equinoxium, that is a castellum that housed the Vexilatio de Legio Decima Gemina, that was stationed in Vindobona and also in Alapingenaria. We have also a couple of verse inscriptions. Equinoxium was set exactly so in between Vindobona and Camontum. So we are between two legionary fortresses. And here we have a couple of verse inscriptions, very simple ones that must be clearly somehow connected to the military milieu. Same situation can be seen in Intercisa, where we have 4 verse inscriptions. 2 are for women. They are partially fragmentary, so Intercisa is also an auxiliary fort, and it's clear, it seems to be clear that in this case as well, there must be some kind of military connection. I wanted to draw your attention to the last inscription that is actually a slab with a frame and an epigraphic field that was prepared but actually was never filled with a text, while you see the inscription is on the lower part of the frame, and it has the text Tutere Felix Severe Conius Dulcissime Somnis, that means sleep well, Severa, sweetest wife. In Tibiscum, we can see more or less the same. Of course, we know that Tibiscum received probably a status of municipium in the time of Septimius Severus, so all inscriptions that are dated before must be somehow connected to the military units set there. And the same for the fort in Calverin, where we must assume a military, some kind of military presence, and Gerla. In this case, we have two beautiful verse inscriptions. One, unfortunately, is fragmentary, but two verse inscriptions from women that have also been published by Peter Kuschwitz and Denise Anouazea in a recent paper. And the last big topic that I would like to address today is that of verse inscriptions in instrumenta, which were found in military settlements, starting from Rhezia, in Vicustas Getius, that is a military settlement on the Limes, and then in Castellum in the 4th century. Fragments of the time were found and then reused in a medieval grave. And in one of these tiles, there is a recurring phrase of the Aeneis, Oceanum inter soggians evora, reliquit Aeneas quamquam socis daredebus mandis. From Surviodunum, that is also an auxiliary fort that has a rich repertoire of inscriptions that are connected to the army, and especially stamped tiles and bricks and military diplomas. We have this inscription on a jug that is decorated with a snake, so I don't have the picture here, but the text is the graffiti text reports some kind of personal message in iambic reading that reads something like "May a pious man or pious who never purifies himself perish." And finally, from Rhezia, in the vicus of Fabiana, that served to secure the river crossing of the Danube, we have some fragments of verses on terra sigillata that actually might also be connected to the frequentation of the sanctuary of Sabatius, of Apollocanus. Sorry. Looking at the rich dossier of metrical texts on instrumenta from Rhezia, we should also mention this dactylic graffito that was placed on the stave of a wine barrel that was discovered in Castra Regina, Regensburg. So the wooden barrel was found in the eastern vicus of the military fortress, and it has to be dated to the late 1st century. So on the barrel we have, as usual, the inscription that indicates the name of the wine merchants that were involved, and then a secondary text that was probably added at the time when the barrel was already in Castra Regina, and soldier, and must have been written by soldiers who were drinking this wine and were deployed in the fortress in the Limes. So the barrel is introduced as a first-person speaker, and it addresses its audience with the welcome news that there is still plenty of wine in it. And unfortunately, this wine is not really there anymore. From Castellum Noricum of the Corsa Sturis, we have, for example, a bronze brooch that has also a few, like 3 words, but that are a quote from Ovid that say "Obstipe si amas," so be struck if you love. And this is a kind of inscription that, so I'm just showing this example, but there are many more that come from military context that contains this kind of short personal love messages. So there are Peniora Amoris and so on that were circulating in the provinces. And finally, we have a series of literary quotes, especially on Greeks, from military forts. And this should be studied more systematically, and we should ask ourselves for what reason they were written, what was their, to what kind of activity they were connected. This could be some kind of schooling activity for children in the camps, for of soldiers, or they were, in some cases, probably just scratched, just as pastime. So one first example comes from Valcum in Pannonia, and we have here the beginning of the Aeneis, Arma virumque, and then the same phrase is repeated again, but not completely, Arma vi, and then the drawing of something that looks, I don't know if it's a horse or a donkey, or something like that. This could be an exercise, very well an exercise, as from the same context we also have bricks with the beginning of the alphabet. In Solvam, Mancio, also in Pannonia, we have also the beginning of the first verses of the 9th book of the Aeneis. And from Pogegena, where the Quas Quinta Gallorum was stationed, we have the verses, the formulaic verses, so speaking is said, winged words, winged verses that might have been written by some soldiers. All these verses are scratched ante cultura. So we have seen here many graffiti that present playful or mocking texts, Peniora Amoris, literary quotes that might be connected to school exercises or just as with texts that were written as pastime by the soldiers. So all these inscriptions showcase an important aspect of the cultural life in military settlements and show how poetry was known and spread at a deep level of the society. I would like to conclude this overview with a small reflection on the deepest level at which poetry was produced and enjoyed in military settlements along the Limes. So we have, I think that the more diverse the production of verses is in a settlement, so when we find from the gravestones to the small objects to scratches, so graffiti, the more deep the poetic culture is penetrated in that settlement. And this is the case of many settlements in Pannonia around Aquincum, and we have seen in Tarcisa where we have like many verse inscriptions compared to other parts of the empire, Aquincum as well. And one interesting case is that of Brigezio. Here we have exactly different verse inscriptions on funerary monuments of different types and on instrumenta, many bricks, pottery, and so on. These forms of, so to say, verbal art can be also combined to other forms of art in the city. So I was there in summer, and they have an impressive amount of frescoes that decorated the villas, the domes of the city, that are really, really impressive, and I haven't seen them except from maybe Italy. And they show the level of culture of the people living there. And the last example I would like to show is actually non-verbal, I would say non-verbal form of poetry, because we have this kind of portrait of the poet Ovid that was made on a brick and with the name below, so it's clear that they wanted to represent Ovid. And this brick has a hole on the top. That means that it was meant to be hung somewhere on the wall. And I think this is a very strong sign that attests that poetry circulated in this context, and it circulated at all levels, so that everybody who was seeing this portrait was able to recognize something that belonged to the cultural baggage of the common cultural baggage of people, either educated or not educated, but everybody could understand that was Ovid and who was Ovid. And with this, yes, I conclude, and I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Clara.